Hola a todos, buenos días con nosotros aquí temprano. Dejo un segundito esta diapositiva para que puedan acceder a la traducción y más adelante la voy a poner de nuevo para que puedan tener el máximo aprovechamiento de nuestro seminar. Dejo 2 minuticos más, solamente poner la cámara de tu teléfono y ya pueden acceder tanto a la traducción en portugués y a la español-inglés, porque nuestros ponentes irán a hablar en inglés. Bueno, gracias por la presencia de todos. Entonces yo tengo el gusto de empezar con nuestro tercero seminar. Y el tema de los 2 primeros fue más quirúrgico, y en este tercero tenemos un tema súper audiológico, que es la inteligencia artificial aplicada, ¿no?, a la programación de los pacientes. Entonces, la inteligencia artificial y el futuro de la evaluación postoperatoria de nuestros usuarios de implante coclear. Este es un trabajo en equipo gigantesco, ¿no? El equipo de investigación de Cochlear Latinoamérica. Yo quería aprovechar y agradecer a Luz Adriana por todo su apoyo siempre, y Valeria Ollangure por nos guiar también. Y recordando de nuestra misión, que es empoderar a las personas a conectarse con otros y vivir una vida plena, transformar la forma que las personas tratan y la gente y el mundo trata la pérdida de audición. Y por último, y el más importante en mi opinión, innovamos y ofrecemos al mercado una gama de soluciones auditivas implantables que brindan resultados auditivos por toda la vida. Y con innovación podemos ofrecer a nuestros destinatarios la tecnología más moderna en soluciones auditivas. Pero para eso necesitamos invertir dinero, tiempo y todo nuestro esfuerzo en investigación y desarrollo de productos. Entonces, con toda esta tecnología que tenemos, logramos empoderar a las personas y transformar la manera como escuchamos o como tratamos y como convivimos con la pérdida de audición. ¿Sí? Esto es un disclaimer, ¿no?, para decir que es un foro de educación, entonces solamente esto para estar siempre en las grabaciones. Y acá doy algunos recados, algunas informaciones bastante rápidas. Esta es la pantalla que deben haber visto justo cuando entramos, de verdad no, pero quizás ahora. Pero más para hablar de esta parte del GoToWebinar. Entonces, en las flechitas que van apareciendo, bueno, tenemos acá algunos materiales recomendados por los ponentes. Por abajo tenemos las preguntas, un espacio donde pueden ir metiendo las preguntas que tengan a lo largo de del seminar. Acá en la flechita roja te puedes cerrar esta ventana de GoToWebinar para que tenga una imagen mejor de todas las diapositivas. Y por fin esta parte que es la parte de documentos también, ¿sí? Muy bien. De nuevo, entonces, para los que entraron un poquito más tarde y para los que no lograron acceder, aquí tenemos el acceso a la traducción, tanto español, inglés como portugués. Si miran el código QR, va a tener que rellenar su nombre, su apellido y su correo, y ahí acceden directamente a un otro GoToWebinar solamente con la traducción. Entonces van a seguirnos viendo por acá, pero por tu teléfono van a tener acceso al audio, ¿sí? Entonces es la manera más sencilla que encontramos de lograr y disponibilizar la traducción a ustedes. Dejo acá más un segundito, espero que las traducciones están bien. Sí, Diego, ya veo. Muy bien. Y para empezar el seminario, ¿cuál es nuestro objetivo? Entonces, el objetivo es centrarse en un tema bastante específico. Como pueden ver, este es inteligencia artificial, que esté a la vanguardia de tratamiento de nuestros dispositivos implantables, difundir los últimos resultados que tenemos en investigación científica en el mundo, establecer los contactos, estimular debates y alcance para todos los profesionales y contribuir claramente para nuestro desarrollo continuo. Entonces, es decir, estamos siempre nos actualizando para promover el mejor tratamiento para nuestros usuarios. Y claro, para lograr todo eso siempre contamos con líderes de opiniones en el tema seleccionado. Y claro, ahora voy solamente a hablar un poquito en inglés para presentar nuestros ponentes. It's a huge pleasure to present Jan Jensen, Philip Van Polk, Regina Priestley, and Valeria Goffi. I don't have words to thank you. And I would like to thank especially Jan Jensen because the time is not so good for him. It's midnight in Sydney. Thank you, Jen. And I'm sure that we will learn from their knowledge and expertise. So this is the title of each presentation, but we will see with the presentations. So please, Jen, I will send your the camera for you and the presentations for you. Let me know if you can open your camera and share.
Yes, my camera
yes.
is on, my sound is on, I hope, and I'll start my presentation.
Nice. We can see your screen and just.
Okay. I have difficulty showing my own presentation. Just a moment.
No problem. I will give the information about the questions, Jan Jensen, because of the time, and will let us a little early of the end of the seminar. If you can send your questions at the end of his presentation, we will appreciate. So in the end of the Jen's presentation, we will have a small part of questions and answers just for Jen because of his time. Thank you so much, Jen. You can start. I will close my microphone and my camera.
Okay, so I'll get going, and if there's any technical issues, let me know, Bianca. So welcome everyone, also on my behalf, on this scientific session today, where we will focus on connected care in hearing implants, in particular into the role that artificial intelligence can play in the care. As we all know, as you all know, of course, hearing loss is prevalent and undertreated. And we estimate that more than 15 million people around the world could benefit from a cochlear implant or an acoustic implant to treat their hearing loss. But also, as you all know, we still have a very low market penetration of hearing implants, of cochlear implants, as well as acoustic implants. So as we think, how can we grow and provide more people access to our technology or to the technology of cochlear implants, how can we then also make sure that we can program these patients in a way that really maximizes their outcomes? Now, what we often observe is that there's a long trajectory for people to eventually arrive at a cochlear implant on their journey to find a suitable solution for their severe profound hearing loss. And there's a number of factors that can play a role on that journey for them. It's the lack of awareness amongst candidates, but also amongst many hearing professionals who don't fully appreciate the indication criteria for cochlear implants. There's challenges around access and funding, surgery hesitancy, concerns about residual hearing, but also uncertainty about the hearing outcomes that could be expected, the size of and aesthetics of the external, and the level of aftercare. And today, of course, in this session, we're really going to focus on hearing outcomes. How can we use technology and modern science to maximize and optimize hearing outcomes to provide an optimal level of aftercare? So at Cochlear, we're very focused on the 4 innovation areas that we're working on. The first one is to continue to improve hearing outcomes and continue to raise the bar in terms of hearing expectations. Secondly, we want to make sure that living with an implantable hearing device is as seamless as possible. We then want to make sure that we use technology to really simplify the aftercare, as well as our endeavor to make sure that we have a wide range of implantable hearing solutions available. And the introduction, for example, of the Ossia system that I think many of you are aware of now is a good example of how Cochlear continues to expand our portfolio of implantable hearing solutions. So let me start first about hearing outcomes, because it is very much connected or related to what we want to do also with artificial intelligence-based fitting. Now, when we talk about hearing outcomes, of course, there's many different aspects that we want to consider. It's about word understanding and quiet, but of course, it's also about hearing and noise, telephone use, sound localization, listening effort, etc. And our goal, of course, is to reduce the gap that people can achieve with a cochlear implant compared to people who live with normal hearing. And that's really what we try to do in our research and development activities at Cochlear, is to develop technology, algorithms, and know-how to really make living with a cochlear implant as normal as possible in terms of outcomes in day-to-day living. Now, this graph shows you how hearing outcomes actually have evolved over the last, say, 30 years or so, 30 or 40 years. And in particular, you can see that in the last 20 years, that we've made significant progress in terms of hearing outcomes. We now have 61%, which is a benchmark in our industry. We demonstrated 61% in a large study with nearly 100 patients that were equipped with a Nucleus 7 sound processor and a slim modular cochlear implant. And that compares to about 40% in 1999. So you can see that we really have made significant progress in terms of hearing outcomes. Even more interesting, perhaps, is to look at the progress that has been made in terms of the variability that we see amongst recipients. So on the bottom of the graph here, you see the results that we had from a study in 2005 with the Freedom implant. So the green bars are the word recognition scores at 3 months. And so you can see that there's a small group that scores really well, over 70%. So the group in orange here scores over 70%. And at the time, we still had a fairly large group who scores less than 30%, which of course is not a great outcome for a cochlear implant. If we then fast forward to 2010, when we run another study, then in this case based with the CI512, in that study we saw that the group that achieves more than 70% word understanding is growing, and the group that is getting poor outcomes is shrinking. So you can see that the red proportion of the graph is becoming smaller. And then if we look at the latest results that we have with the slim modular in combination with Nucleus 7, we now see that there's a large group, nearly 1/3 of all the, or actually over 1/3 of all of the participants in this study did achieve more than 70% word understanding. So really excellent results with their device after 3 months. And a smaller group that has a poor word understanding, less than 30%. So on one hand, we can say, look, this is really great progress. On the other hand, we still see a fairly large amount of variability between some people doing really well with their device and others not really getting the expected benefit that we would like to see. And so as we consider what are some of the causes or sources of hearing outcome variability, then we believe that an important element of the outcome variability has actually to do with neural survival. Is that depending whether candidates or recipients have good neural survival, as you can see on the left, or poor neural survival, we believe could play actually a significant role in their hearing outcomes, as was actually demonstrated in this study by Kamakura. That, of course, is a biological factor that the candidate has at the time of candidacy, and as well the cognitive function is of course also a function of their biology. Then we have a number of factors that relate more to the device and the surgical procedure. So there's the cochlear trauma, the electrode location, and also the sound processing and stimulation strategy, or another set of variables or parameters that can potentially have an impact on that outcome variability. But then the last group has then to do with fitting and rehabilitation. And what I show to you here on the right is data that we have analyzed from a large set of clinics, looking at the mean C levels in these clinics, as well as the mean dynamic range. And so what you can see on these graphs is that there's a huge variability. There's clinics who routinely have very small dynamic range for their patients, and their clinics have a very large dynamic range for their patients. There's clinics whose mean sea level is around 160, and there's clinics whose mean sea level is nearly at 200. So we see a lot of variability in how fitting is performed, and we believe that that might be also a reason why we see a lot of variability in outcomes. So that brings us then to connected care, and really our philosophy that we have to develop a set of tools to optimize the outcomes for every recipient. Now, what we're trying to do in connected care is, of course, also in line with trends that we see moving into healthcare in general. In particular, wireless technology, cloud connectivity, the sensors or Internet of Things, and of course, in our case, you could think of objective measures as sensors, or elements together with artificial intelligence, or all factors or technologies that are moving into healthcare. And of course, Cochlear as a technology leader has followed these trends and is bringing these technologies then also in the world of cochlear implants. A really important ingredient or component of that concept is, of course, the connectivity that we have implemented between the sound processor and the smartphone. Initially just for Nucleus 7, now we have that for Nucleus 7 as well as for the Cancer 2 processor. Because once we have that connectivity from the sound processor to an app, then we can go from the app over the internet to the cloud, and that of course opens up a whole range of new possibilities. So our vision is that we develop a portfolio of connected care tools that will increase access, optimize outcomes, and transform the existing care delivery model. And so what I'd like to do now is touch really on these different elements as part of our overall connected care philosophy. So we have surgical care with a new tool that we're piloting called Nucleus SmartNav that I will briefly touch on. Then, of course, we have our fitting software with Custom Sound Pro. We have then the new tool that has proven to be so valuable now during the COVID times with remote check that enables you as clinicians to follow up your patients remotely. And then we're piloting another tool that is helping patients really in their journey to familiarize themselves, a tool called Copilot that will provide the level of self-managed care. And the whole idea behind all these technologies is that they're connected and that we derive data-driven insights from these tools that then will allow you as professionals to deliver personalized care to your patients. Ultimately, of course, we must make sure that through this technology that we deliver value from the perspective of the different customers. So for patients, this means that Cochlear's connected care enables them to get personalized care from anywhere, whether they're in the clinic or whether they're at home. We want to make sure they can receive the most optimal care for them. For you as professionals, we want to make sure that Cochlear Connected Care enables you to access and efficiently optimize your patient's hearing, again, regardless from whether that patient is sitting in front of you in the hospital or in the clinic, or whether they are at home or anywhere else. And last but not least, we also want to make sure that for payers and providers, that Cochlear's Connected Care delivers value for money through efficient and evidence-driven care operations. And that's really important. I really want to stress that. I think as an industry, we need to be more scientific and evidence-driven to make sure that we truly optimize the outcomes for our recipients in a more structured and streamlined way. So the different components then that we are developing and stepwise releasing to the markets that will deliver on that vision of connected care start with the Nucleus SmartNav system. So it's still in a controlled market release at the moment. It's not a tool that is broadly available yet, but this is really a tool to be used during surgery, providing wireless actionable insights to support intraoperative navigation during cochlear implant surgery. So you can see here, it uses the surgical processor that communicates with the implant and then wirelessly communicates a number of measures to the application that runs on a Windows iPad. The functionality that you find in this tool is, of course, the traditional impedance and automatic NRT measurements, but we've complemented that with a tool called Placement Check that will provide information on the final electrode placement and is designed to reduce the need for intraop imaging. Our vision is that eventually all the information that you receive today from an intraop X-ray or CT scan is that we can provide that to you without the need of a scan, but really through telemetry measurements. And the placement check, which for example would detect tip foldovers, I think is a very good tool or function that we've built into SmartNav, along with some other interesting features such as the speed of insertion measurements, as well as an angle insertion depth estimate for lateral wall electrodes. So that's one component of our vision for the future. The second component, of course, that you already are very familiar with is Cochlear Custom Sound Pro, the new fitting software, which really follows a long evolution of innovation in fitting software, going from the very first archaic programming systems, then to the introduction of NRT and ECAP measurements in the 90s, then of course the introduction of tablet-based fitting with NFS or wireless fitting. And we, of course, are continuing that innovation with things like maps in the cloud, remote fitting, big data, and, of course, also artificial intelligence, which is the subject of the session today. When we developed Custom Sound Pro, we really wanted to start from how is fitting software used today, and we do observe a wide diversity in fitting practices and care delivery models. We also observe that it can be very difficult and challenging, particularly for novel audiologists or people that work in the hearing aid channel and want to provide CI aftercare. It can be difficult to acquire the level of proficiency that is required. And also, of course, custom sound had been around for a long time, and we really thought it was time for an upgrade. And that was another reason why we developed Custom Sound Pro. Of course, through Custom Sound Pro, we had a lot more focus on the user experience, leveraging and encouraging modern fitting practices, using big data for automation and data-driven design, and then make sure that we have a single platform that could be used by more novice users as well as for expert users. So we combined the best of both worlds of the old Nucleus fitting software and of Custom Sound into the new Custom Sound Pro. And the software has been really well received. Top features on which we get feedback is the dashboard function, the fact that there's much more on-air time, the speed of the algorithms, the new automatic NRT algorithm, the fact that we do not automatically do the impedance measurements. And so the fitting software overall, from what we hear, is much more centered on the patient during the fitting process. Then the third element, of course, of our care portfolio is Cochlear Remote Check. I think it's a tool that many of you already have heard of. It's a convenient at-home testing tool for Nucleus 7 and Cancer 2, really allowing the patient to run a range of tests at home that have been first set up by a clinician. Those results are then being compiled and are being made available to the clinician, who can then review the results and decide whether there's a need for the patient to actually come into the clinic, or whether they can just repeat this in 6 months into the future. So this whole workflow, it's enabled from you as a clinician, and it's really up to you then to determine after the session whether there's a need for the patient to come back into the clinic. There's a range of tasks that can be performed. There's an implant request to make a picture of the implant. There's a questionnaire, an audiogram, etc. And the next slide has a view of how Remote Check presents itself to the patient as part of the Nucleus Smart app. You can see it here. It will send reminders a few days ahead of the time that the Remote Check session can be taken. It can be taken at any time. It doesn't have to be synchronous with the clinician looking at it. The patient can do it in their own time, in the comfort of their own home, making a picture of the implant, completing the questionnaire, doing the audiogram, doing a speech and noise test, of course, very important information. And then all that information together with the impedances and with the advanced data logging is then uploaded into the cloud, where it then can be reviewed by US professionals, and you can then decide then what the follow-up is required, whether an in-visit clinic, an in-person visit is required, or whether you can provide some guidance remotely, for example, where you can advise some people to start using forward focus, for example, because we know that it's a huge benefit for people that are using that, but sometimes people need to be reminded or encouraged to try out some of these new algorithms. And so Remote Check can be used as a baseline check. So in the first 3 to 6 months, it can be used for acute support, particularly when people are struggling, perhaps a bit more in this that early phase of the journey with a cochlear implant. It could be used as an annual clinical check, and of course, last but not least, also for clinical triage. I'm sure that many of you would have received calls from parents that are concerned about something might have happened, the child might have fallen, they're a bit worried about their hearing performance perhaps, and Remote Check then allows you to do remotely a check of the impedances to do a quick audiogram, for example, and see if that's all okay. And so this brings a lot of benefits that we then also want to translate in the future with AI fitting. It's about cost and time. It's making it more efficient, more convenience also for the patients, but then also more meaningful insights from a lot more real-world input we want to bring into the fitting process, improving access and driving that consistency of outcomes. And that's really what leads me then to the final part of my presentation, which is the case to use artificial intelligence in fitting in the future. Because today, although we are making progress with upgrades of the fitting software, we still see that fitting is actually considered as complex, and particularly by people who are used to fit hearing aids. We know that many people that would benefit from a cochlear implant are today using a high-power hearing aid. So many of our potential future customers sit in that hearing aid channel. And if we can make, through AI fitting, make the fitting of cochlear implants more accessible for professionals in that channel, that of course will be a significant advantage. So we want to take some of the black magic perhaps away of the fitting, of that fitting complexity. We then also observe today that fitting is not evidence-based. We see a lot of difference in fitting practices, but there's not a lot of evidence supporting that. It's not very engaging for the patients today, listening to beeps. The targets are not always clear. What is it that we want to achieve in the first fitting session? What do we want to achieve in the second fitting session? Large differences between clinics, and also it can be very time consuming. And so we do think that in the coming years that AI-based fitting will start playing a role. Why do we do think? First of all, because we see more and more also in healthcare that the end user is being more empowered with things like Apple Health, Fitbit, Strava. We really see that the world and patients are really asking to be more empowered about their own health. We see more trust in artificial intelligence-based medicine growing as more and more fields of medicine are starting to use this technology. And then, of course, there's the technology. Because of the connectivity that we have, plus the fact that we can capture more objective measures in the future, all that data, of course, will help us and really develop algorithms that will really help to optimize the hearing outcomes. And then last but not least, of course, COVID-19 also has demonstrated or has indicated there's really a need in the world of medicine to treat patients distant from the hospital. So with this, I've just given you a very quick overview about hearing outcomes, what our ambition is there, but then the variability that we also see in hearing outcomes and how we can hopefully, by bringing in novel technology and connected care, how we can then optimize hearing outcomes in an even more convenient way, both for you as professionals as well as for the end users. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and as Bianca said, happy to take any questions that you might have after my presentation.
Thank you, Jen. So I guess that my camera is open. So I will let your presentation in my screen. So thank you for the excellent presentation. And let me change my earphones because, okay. So let me see that we have many questions, and I will do some of them, and then we can send you in another moment. So the first one is, let me see, what is the speaking noise test that the remote check have? It's
called the digit triplet test. So it's a test that was designed to be very convenient on a mobile device, on a smartphone, because it plays numbers in varying levels of background noise. So it's an adaptive speech and noise test, but using numbers, which makes it really easy for people to enter. But it's a validated test. In fact, Philippe van Poeke has been one of the inventors of that test. Has really made a big contribution to that, and it's available in many different languages and validated across different languages. So that's why we chose that test.
Okay, nice. One more. Does Cochlear will work with diagnostic tools like audiometry tests in apps?
We definitely have contacts with companies that are active in this area, and one of the things that we'd like to do in the future is to build CI criteria into some of these diagnostic tools, so that when people say take an audiogram, it would of course be great that if that the software that runs the audiogram would already indicate whether people, for example, fall within cochlear implant criteria. So that's one of the discussions that we've been having with some of the manufacturers in diagnostic tools, but we don't have ourselves a direct and a tools or measurement division ourselves, but work with others that make these diagnostic measurement tools.
Okay, nice. So I will join 2 questions. So does SmartNav will do advanced NRT, and is there any project to include ECOG measures in the SmartNav?
Yes, yeah, yes. So we are. So SmartNav is a piece of software. So the benefit of that, of course, is that we can and are planning to extend the functionality, yeah, after we introduce the product. So we are indeed planning to include more advanced versions of NRT. But very important, we really want SmartNav to be a tool that can be used by a wide range of clinicians. So it's on purpose not a research tool. It's really a clinical tool. So that's why at the moment, the ECOG functionality that we provide is through a different tool called the Cochlear Research Platform, which is really the tool that's focused on clinics that are heavily research focused. But what we will plan to do is that once we have learned enough about the novel methods, then we will translate that to SmartNav. So SmartNav or the Cochlear Research Platform is a bit like the nursing room, where we can try new things. And once we've proven them that they really work and we can simplify their use for routine clinical use, then we will bring them into SmartNav. A good example, for example, is the placement tool or the tip fold over detection. We had that initially in the Cochlear Research Platform in the form of a heat map, which required quite a bit of interpretation to understand it. But then we simplified the interpretation of that algorithm into a visual graph that's now in SmartNav that shows where the tip fold over might have happened. And so ECOG will also, in the longer term future, we do expect to bring that into SmartNav at some point, but only when we feel that there's enough clinical utility for it beyond the pure research use, which it is what it's still today. I would say we're still learning very much what the value is of ECOG, in particular how to use and interpret the feedback that comes from the ECOG signal.
Okay. So I would like to thank you, Jen, and it was an excellent presentation. I'm sure that everybody could enjoy learning a lot. Thank you so much. And for the audience, Jen will leave us because it's too late for him. Thank you so much again and again. And I don't know if you can say bye.
Yes, thank you, Bianca, and thank you for everyone for participating today. Very much look forward to make my way again to Latin America, hopefully in 2022. Many of you, of course, met at conferences, but I wish you a very pleasant remainder of this meeting. I think we have an excellent panel of presenters, and any further questions that you might have on my presentation, Philippe van Poeken will be able to answer you. But,
thank you.
Thank you again, and see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jen. So we will continue. So I would like to present Philippe van Poeken. This is the bio. I don't read every information, but you are sure there is expertise with. He has a big expertise in the cochlear implant area, applied intelligence artificial applied to cochlear implants. So Philippe, if you can open your camera, and I will send the let me see that you receive the.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Bianca, and hi everyone. Of course, also from my side, welcome to this meeting. Okay, let me see.
Yes, so, now it's perfect. Okay.
Okay, so I can't see the audience, so unfortunately. So okay. So Bianca, can you remind me how much time I have for the presentation?
You have 15 minutes, but I prefer that you speak without pressure. So, but we estimate 15 minutes.
No, but okay, I was just worried that maybe I had to be a bit shorter. No, that should be fine. So, yeah, good morning, everybody. So, Philip van Poeken, I'm working in Jan's group. I'm heading a group of researchers that is called the Algorithms and Applications Research Department. And as the name implies, what we do with that team, we are really researching and innovating in the space of sound coding, but also professional tools. So tools for the professionals, these are the surgeons. Jan referred to SmartNav. Some of our earlier work on SmartNav was there. Also remote check, some of the developments in there have been originally initiated in the group that I lead. And so today I'm going to speak about ongoing work on towards AI-assisted fitting. Now, we are really the early innovation group. That's quite important. So what I will tell today is really in a research phase. I can tell you a bit about what we're doing, but there's still a long way to go before things are picked up by product development, and we've gone through all of the qualification processes to really bring it to you in the clinical community. That's the reality in medical device industry. These lead times are a bit long. Anyway, so as Jan was pointing out, really hearing outcomes is at the heart of what we want to do, and the patient really is at the heart of our vision on what we want to achieve. They're very central, and so if you look at the world around us, which is, for instance, about personalized care, really, it all starts with having a really deep insight in the needs of the patient. And so we're living in very interesting times from that perspective, because since Nucleus 6, we started to introduce connectivity, and there's already really nice features based on connectivity, wireless links connecting the sound processor to the phone and then into the cloud. But more is to come. We really start from a vision that relatively soon, at least in the next decade, what will happen is that our devices will really be connected to that data platform that is central here in the graph and throughout the hearing journey, even in the candidacy phase, but of course also surgery, device fitting, then the rehabilitation phase, and in the end, being a lifelong user of a hearing implant, a lot of data will be generated that may be useful. That may be useful to really organize the care around the patient. And so here I mentioned some sources. So what is the status of the device? How is the person using the device? How about the cochlear health? Is the auditory nerve still in a good state? What about the electrode? How is the patient doing in terms of hearing performance? Really very important. Even at this moment in time, we do not know exactly how our patients are doing in their daily life. They really have to come to the clinic before we can measure it, but potentially we can do it in the home environment. And so such an environment might generate quite a lot of really useful and innovative data that is not yet existing, that may be very beneficial to the caregivers of the patients. And that's illustrated there in the graph. So if the patient and the clinician are really connected in such the clinicians, the circle of the clinicians around the patient, they're really connected, and we can think about all kinds of things happening based on that data. It's not about the data as such, but really about the insights and the actions that are coupled to those insights. So imagine a future where when the patient enters into your office, you already have all of the recent hearing data that you would typically collect now in the sound booth. It would already be available because the patient has already done the hearing test before he came to the center. That would really change the dynamic of how a clinical visit is looking, is organized, and transform it, and really potentially be more efficient, be more pleasant, in the end reach better outcomes and a better relation between the patient and the clinician. So of course, algorithms can contribute to that, and Jan spoke about machine learning and AI. What is our vision there? Well, really, I like very much, let's say it this way, I like very much this quote here by a professor from Stanford University, Dr. Verghese, who really here says, let's look for a situation of 1 + 1 = not 2, but 3. And so can we provide tools to the clinical community such that if they are using those tools, that we actually empower them to do more, to make better medical decisions, maybe quicker medical decisions, less errors. And so the American Medical Association is calling this the augmented intelligence scenario instead of artificial intelligence scenario. So that's a bit what we want to achieve with our tools. And of course, AI as such and machine learning as such is really a fantastic opportunity, but it's also difficult. It's difficult in many aspects. We have to be quite careful. The tools that we offer need to be evidence-based. They need to be credible, trustworthy. And so this is just a graph from the internet that I took that really stresses the importance of good data controls. For instance, if you start to use that data to train a utility that will come up with a recommendation. I have to say it's complex for the moment. We're looking into that space, but the regulatory environment, how we can convince an FDA or European authorities or Latin America authorities to give us markets access, authorized market access, it's still very much an evolving situation. And so we're trying to navigate that space. So Jan already pointed to where we could use this, and so here is another illustration of that one of those core problems in terms of variability in hearing outcomes. So to the left, you see the result of a relatively recent study. It was in Germany, where we do see preoperative scores and postoperative scores on a monosyllabic word test, and it's quite clear from the graph that indeed we do have a large variability in terms of outcomes. And of course, the reasons are manifold. That there's hearing outcomes in the end. It's the outcome of a whole process. The surgeon has implanted the electrode, audiologist has fitted, the patient had a certain hearing potential, certain auditory nerve, there's cognition. Jan pointed to several of those factors. So, but to the right, I also show in another visualization also that there is variability in fitting outcomes. So it's data from an internal study, and every line there is representing a clinic, a center. And what is plotted there is the average sea level across patients for that particular center. And you do see a bit of a spread, okay, but also quite big differences between some of the centers. Some that indeed are providing very low, relatively low sea levels, and everybody a bit the same, whereas others it's quite different. And so that variability is unexplained. So what is the link between the two? How strong is it? Is a bit is still a topic of further research, but we can postulate at least that if we would have more consistency in fitting outcomes in maps, it might also reduce the variability that we have in hearing outcomes. And so how to reach that type of consistency? Well, just looking at AI as a possible solution, it would take the form of some kind of a recommendation tool supporting the audiologist in the fitting process, of course. And essentially, there's really three questions to be solved. What do we want to achieve? How do we define good? How will we measure whether something is a good map? And then what are the relevant data sources, the relevant input features that we can use to feed into such an algorithm to come up with map recommendation? And of course, what is the technology that we will use inside the recommendation engine? And in the next slides, I will walk over these data sources that we are exploring. So first of all, what defines good? What constitutes good? So, look, as Jan pointed out, hearing outcomes is really central, and that's where we will want to push. There has been, looking back, typically, whether we did talk about a good map or maybe a not so good map, we often look at C levels and T levels and start the discussion. The better approach is definitely, in our opinion, if you can look at speech performance as such and measure it, really making it quantifiable through speech testing. And then, in essence, it's about two dimensions, right? If a patient is reaching higher maximum speech understanding score along the speech audiometry curve, that's better. Now, if also the speech reception threshold is at lower levels, so the patient has a broader range over which performance is good, that's also what we want to achieve. So, if we could only measure speech understanding as the output metric, that would be fantastic. Now, we know that that this is difficult, and it's a bit cumbersome to do lots of speech testing once you're in the clinic. You have the constraints around the sound booth, and then the patient has to travel, etc. So one solution there is definitely trying to come to booth speech testing and provide the capability that the hearing test can already be done in the waiting room, or even better, in the convenience of the home. And connectivity can really help us there. So we, in our lab, we have, so Jan mentioned the digit triplet test, the speech and noise test. We have variations on that where we also can test words and quiet, and the computer is self-scoring. And so here to the right, you see the result of a relatively, it's a piece of work that we done 2 years ago, where we were exploring whether the computer algorithms that we had designed were delivering us equivalents to in-clinic testing. And here you see blue and red are comparison at I think the noise ratios of -6 and the other one -9. So this was a study on normal hearing, but we had really equivalence between the computer scoring, the self-testing, and then what we the test that you would get really with in clinic quality testing by an audiologist. So we believe the problem is solved. So let's turn our attention to how to design a fitting engine. And of course, it all starts with the first map, an initiation map, a first fit map. And so what are the relevant data sources? Of course, the patient is never the first patient who gets a certain piece of technology. And so we can really use that historical knowledge and kind of reason that the optimal map of this patient will quite likely be like the optimal maps that other people with similar technology and a similar pathology would have. And so here you see, for instance, graphs that show it's box plots that show fitting levels, again from an internal database, where you see to the left the average profiles for perimodiolar leads, and on the right for lateral leads. So the profiles are slightly different, so of course reflecting the position of the electrode, but we can use this type of prior information to already come up with a candidate map to start with, and go live quite quickly without spending a lot on a lot of time on detailed psychoacoustic measurements. So that's already one source. Of course, it's group level, it's average, it's population mean. At the time of activation, you also do know a bit of data that is really specific to the patient. Things like the hearing history, what was the pre-op score, how is the patient post-op breathing, the duration of deafness, etc. Potentially, also there is information already available from surgery. If imaging is there, potentially we could tell something about the modular distance of the electrodes. And we're working on methods in the research lab to really try to estimate the position of the electrode a bit from objective measures such as transimpedance matrices. And of course, there's the biology side. The state of the auditory nerve can also be used as an input, and we can try to estimate whether, for instance, there are dead zones by looking at NRT graphs, be it growth functions or recovery or spread functions. Okay, so all of that is really to support the initial map creation, and then people go off and then they start wearing their device in the first weeks, and the loudness perceptual change, etc. So what can we do there? If the clinician is connected to the home of the patient and the patient has a smartphone, then it's not one of the easy things to measure is really the device use through the use of data logging. And so to the right, you see results from a paper from one of my PhD students, Tobias Busch, who looked at average data time on air, so device use across the lifespan. These were really long-term averages, telling us that when we were very young, we use the device a little bit less, and then at older age, it's more like 11 hours a day or something like that, been going down a bit. But the granularity of this type of information is, of course, not good enough. And so to the left, you do see a bit more recent work where we are really following up on one particular patient during the first weeks of activation, and the pattern that we see is quite interesting, where indeed in the beginning people start to wear the device, and quite soon we get to good, solid, stable use. It's that type of information that we would like to see, the trend lines, but also there's quite a lot of variation. So there's maybe still, on a day-to-day basis, there's maybe still room for improvement for this particular patient. So device usage is one thing. The other thing is hearing performance data. And so around 2015, we did a project with University of Amsterdam, a European funded project, where we had built a capability for self-testing of the patients in their home as well. relatively small study it was, only 8 patients. But we were a bit nervous when we started that work, like, are people really going to be able to do quite difficult test monosyllabic words and quite so early in the process? But we were pleasantly surprised. The patients could do it. They had a bit of struggle with the technology, but the task as such, they could do it. And so the 6 patients that you see here to the right on the lower panels, they are really the more classic patients, where they start from a certain level and then very quickly during the first week they improve and get to stable performance. But quite interesting is also as well that we saw that some patients, in this case 2, started right away at very, very high levels, and whatever was done in further fine-tuning of that map was not contributing to hearing performance or clinical benefits anymore, not in terms of speech understanding at least. And so it really raises the question, does it make sense to invite everybody back to the clinic at the same rhythm, or should we really make it more individual and use this type of data that we remotely collect to more dynamically decide whether a certain individual should come back to the clinic or not? All right, so finally, technologies that we can use for the tuning. So here, yeah, like we have a first fit, and then patients come back. We have a bit of data coming from the first week to do a tuning session A. Patients come back, and then tune session B. What technologies can we use? And there, we're looking very broadly. And in the lab, we master all kinds of techniques. And so here, I already took a graph that is kind of showing what methods we can use. To the left, so they are ordered in 2 axes. So the vertical axis is an accuracy axis. The higher, the more complex decision making the technology can support, whereas to the right is more like how explainable is the technology. And so deep neural networks, for instance, are quite popular nowadays. We see them everywhere. They're very powerful indeed. So they can really model very complex nonlinear relations between lots and lots of variables. But you really need a lot of data, big data that is not existing in our field necessarily. So it's going to take a lot of time and cost to collect that. Whereas the methods to the right, the classification rules, etc., they don't require that much data and can be applied already on expert-based systems relatively quickly. And so we're kind of looking how we can climb this ladder and provide enough value with the technologies that we have at hand. Okay, so I'll stop here and kind of summarize that really there is a bright future ahead. Really, this type of technologies in the field of in our work field, and the basis really is that rich data that we collect from the patients. So wireless links and cloud technology are really very central, allowing us to really also support patient centricity in the sense that they can take a more active role and do lots of these tests in the home environment. We will have more frequent data as such, and can better monitor what's happening. And so if that data is made available to clinicians, even without an AI component, it's already quite interesting because it leads to an augmented intelligence scenario where clinicians can take better decisions. But if we then apply algorithms as well to analyze that data, maybe we can even provide these tools that are kind of coming up with a recommendation for the clinician to act on potentially. And in the end, what we all hope is that we can serve our patients better and achieve higher outcomes with less cost in essence in terms of serving their needs. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to return to you, Bianca.
Thank you, Felipe. Wow. So many things to think in our practice as audiologists. I'm including here. So thank you. So I will ask you to stay with us. So after Regina and Valeria, we will have our question and answer session. So thank you so much. And I would like to present Regina Priestley. Again, it's a huge pleasure to have with us. Regina, I will send, again, I will not read the bio because it's really amazing. All the bios, all the expertise that Jan, Felipe, you, and Valeria Goffi. So I will send you the yes, you receive Do you receive some? Okay, nice. We can see your screen.
Okay, great.
I will turn off my camera and go on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today and really thrilled to hear what our first two speakers were describing in terms of innovation and certainly the concerns that we all have as we look at all the changes that are coming in our field. And so I wanted to share with you some of the research that we did in conjunction with Cochlear and the use of artificial intelligence. First and foremost, I want to recognize my team at the Greater Baltimore Medical Center who were instrumental in this study. I think it's very important that I first share with you what prompted us to participate in this study. And a lot of it will certainly be in agreement with what Jan was describing earlier, in that we know that there are staggering numbers of people that do not have access or are unaware of the technology that is available to them. But we also know that as we do our outreach and we try to encourage individuals to pursue cochlear implants, is that our clinic would not be able to sustain a large group of people coming in. And so first and foremost, we needed to look at how would we manage an increase of patients. We also know from research, excuse me, that there are a wide variety of practices that occur, and sometimes that's from center to center, and sometimes that is even within centers. And that inconsistency, we feel, is impacting patient outcome. We want to grow our program. However, we want to make sure that as we're addressing issues of lack of booth space or sometimes staffing, that we are able to make sure that we're providing good care without jeopardizing patient service. And so we began our participation in this study, and just to give you a quick overview is that the subjects included two different groups. So one was an existing cochlear implant patient who was converting their traditional map, as I'm going to refer to it, from a experienced clinician to that of an artificial intelligence map. And then our second group were those patients who were coming as newly implanted, not having any other model, but using artificial intelligence from the very beginning. We had 9 centers around the US that participated in this study. We did tests through the use of the AI system to look at audiometry, looking at comparing of phonemes or discrimination abilities, as well as speech and noise and loudness scaling. And then we did questionnaires for both the patients as well as a survey of clinicians and how they felt about the use of AI. And that testing was completed at activation 1, 3, and 6 months. And I think that also speaks to some of the conversation already this morning about looking at how do we provide this service in a timely manner that's both efficient for our practice and convenient for our patients. So the system itself, we used AutoQueen and the Fox system. And how this worked is that the artificial intelligence system would create artificial maps. Those similar to what Philippe was just talking about is that there's some common threads among the maps that we see that our patients are using. And so patients start off with the most comfortable map, and we're given progressive maps. And then upon return, depending on what stage of the process they were in, that 1, 3, or 6 months, we would conduct all of the 4 assessments that I mentioned previously. After those assessments were completed, the artificial intelligence system would look at the outcomes of the patient, and it would make suggestions to us. And those suggestions we could send directly to the patient's processor, go live, get feedback from them, and then we could determine if we were going to save and utilize those maps, or if we felt the patient needed something more, then we could certainly, as the provider, be able to make those changes that we felt necessary to the map. We tried to not do that because we wanted to be able to look at the functionality and the accuracy of the artificial intelligence map. And so that protocol occurred at each of those time frames. So here's group 2. This group was our traditional group. So you can see there was a wide variety in age, length of deafness, and length of CI use. And all of these individuals agreed to take their traditional map and put that in storage, so to speak, and use an artificial intelligence map. And so what you can see, and I think what is very interesting, is we compare the data of where they were performing with their experienced clinician maps that were created and their follow-up visits. And we were able to see that when we compared them, that the expert clinician map and the map that was created by AI was very similar. I think something else that is interesting as well is when we look at performance and those outcome measures, and I think that's something we need to keep focusing on, is what exactly are we looking at from our patients? What are we looking for to say that they've reached their optimal level of performance? And so we look at this, again, whether it was an expert clinician map or it was a map that was created by the artificial intelligence system, we are still seeing very comparable results. So overall, we felt confident that we could see that both map approaches, whether it's an expert clinician or the AI, was resulting in good outcomes. I think the exciting thing is that we were meeting those outcomes within 3 to 6 months of activation. So I think that is really exciting. What we found in the study, and specifically in our center, is that those experienced CI users did not return to their original map. They stuck with their AI map, and more interestingly, as part of the study, we were only using an AI map on one ear for any of the patients who were bilateral. And all of our bilateral patients at our center came back and asked if we could actually do an AI map on the other ear. So I think that that says a lot in terms of patient satisfaction. As well as, I have to be very honest, I think all of the clinicians were pretty anxious in the beginning as to how artificial intelligence could do as good of a map as we can with years of experience. And honestly, I think part of us were worried about the AI map doing a lot better than we did. But what we found is that the clinicians were very satisfied. And I think that speaks volumes as we talk as colleagues about where we're headed in our field. And as we look at group 1, which is the group that was the newly implanted, so they have no traditional background, that all of their experience was with the use of AI. As you can see, this group, we did have a significant age range, not quite as lengthy in terms of degree or duration of deafness, but still some significant experience with hearing loss. And so when we take a look at their scores, we now have some preoperative scores that we're comparing to. And as we can see, by 3 months, patients were demonstrating a 43% increase on average, and by 6 months, 46% improvement in their performance, which I think is just speaks to itself, the incredible advantage that in a short period of time that we were able to get a patient to what we consider to be our more optimal performance, and certainly in agreement with what Philippe had shared earlier. The other thing that we looked at is that for our testing, preoperatively, we did not have AZ bios and noise. As we had mentioned before, not every center uses the same protocol, and so that information was not available. But we did compare that to just their 3 and 6 month performance. So this is AZ bio and noise. Just as a benchmark, we use the 532 study. So on average, just to let you know, most patients are around 14 to 15% on AZ bio with a +10 score. So we can see the level of improvement that patients demonstrated in a noisy environment. And for this testing, there were no noise suppression. Auto sensitivity control was the only thing that was active. So patients could perform much better in their environments using accessories and/or other fitting parameters. And so what did we learn? As we look at this study, I think it's very interesting to compare to a more traditional model. So what you see here is the information that shows us what we found from our AI study, and we compared that to the 532 study. And that study had very similar parameters in terms of the assessment protocol. But the thing that was different is that was using a traditional model as opposed to an AI model. And multiple centers that were in the AI study also were in the 532 study. So there was consistency there as well. And as you can see, performance, whether it be through a traditional model with very experienced clinicians to that of the artificial intelligence, the scores are very, very comparable. And so I think that is certainly reassuring as we look at that. I think something that was most important that came out of it is that the centers participating had a wide variety of study protocol in terms of how often does a patient come back in the first year. And research shows us that there are centers on average 7 to 10 visits during that first year. I know with the artificial intelligence study, the number of visits could be 4 to 5 up to 6. And these scores were obtained with just 3 more visits following initial activation. I think that really speaks to our ability to be able to streamline. I think it speaks to our ability to use artificial intelligence moving forward on newly implanted patients, or certainly patients who are already implanted but may be struggling. We certainly were able to optimize performance without the need for a booth, because all of this testing, with the exception of the CNC and the AZ BIOS, the assessments were all done directly linking to the patient's processor. And so that they were able to do that without impact of any noise within the environment, as well as any input from the other ear that was not implanted. So I think that's important. I think it's also important to know that there was no negative impact on either the clinician or the patient in the use of AI during our study. So I think from a personal standpoint, we learned a lot more than just the use of AI. Number one is that it certainly gave me confidence to know that the use of AI could be put into practice, and I would be assured that patients would have good outcomes. So I think that was very important. But I think the other thing is that it was also a learning tool for us. So as the artificial intelligence system takes all the data that it's able to collect, because I have my years of cochlear implant experience, and based on whatever research I've read, but artificial intelligence has the ability to put together a significant amount of data, more so than I as one clinician can do. And so as we looked at the recommendations that AI was offering, I felt that it really strengthened my own clinical skills. But I still used my clinical skills. I wasn't obsolete because of AI. I was there to make recommendations and use it as a learning experience as well. I think it certainly speaks to the support for standardization of care, so that all patients receive the same type of assessment, and we're all looking for the same level of outcome to make sure that patients are meeting expected performance. I think too that as a center, we had already had very limited number of appointments during that first year, but it really gave us confidence to know, based on our own research and then the participation in this study, that we could move forward, streamlining the expectations of the patient and providing excellent service all at the same time. And then I think that it really just encourages us to think, as we look at these tools, how can we give the patient more independent ownership of completing those assessments prior to us participating, so we could be seeing another patient, and then also remote services as we explore, and as patients used in this study was additional support from the Connected Care platform that Cochlear has, and now we have implemented the use of remote check as well. So I think that this has given us great insight as to where we need to direct our practice as we're moving forward. And here I just wanted to provide some resources if anybody would like to look into more information about the standardization of care as well as the use of AI. So I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. So just to inform the audience, some of them resources we share in our inside of our materials. It's impossible to share all of the publications, but we share 4 of them and one from Felipe. So thank you so much for your presentation, and we will continue with Valeria Goff. And I ask you again, as I ask you for Felipe, if you can stay with us for after Valeria Goff presentation, we will have our question and answer session. Valeria, I sent the platform. Let me.
I've already received.
Oh, nice.
Hola.
Let me explain. Valeria will present in Spanish. Thank you. So it's easier for us, and the translate Spanish will be in English, and Portuguese also. Portuguese will Spanish Portuguese. Thank you so much, Valeria.
Gracias Bianca, gracias a Cochlear por la invitación. No sé si me pueden ver y les pido disculpas porque algo pasó con mi cámara en GoToWebinar, pero es un honor estar aquí contándoles un poco de mis estudios y bueno, la pregunta es si las medidas objetivas podrán ser implementadas, incluidas en el futuro en las, digamos, programaciones basadas en la inteligencia artificial. En realidad, los estudios en los implantes cocleares, los estudios con los umbrales de la respuesta neural han sido y vienen siendo estudiados para que los podamos usar en las correlaciones con los niveles psicofísicos de la programación, los niveles T y los niveles C. Pero ya desde los estudios de Carolyn Brown y de Paul Abbas, ya desde un principio, pudimos ver que las correlaciones son muy variables, probablemente por diferencias individuales de cada paciente, como nos mostraron los ponentes anteriores, ya sea de edad, ya sea del mismo tipo de electrodo. El hecho es que algunos pacientes, el umbral de la telemetría de respuesta neural está en el medio del campo rango dinámico, para otros está coincidente al nivel C, y entonces esas relaciones tienen que ser mejor estudiadas para que los podamos usar, porque sabemos cómo nos ayudan esas medidas objetivas, sobre todo en niños, en bebés que están siendo cada vez más tempranamente implantados y en personas que no tienen tanta experiencia auditiva. Mi interés clínico, digamos, no soy una pesquisadora, sino que una audióloga clínica, por las medidas avanzadas de la telemetría de respuesta neural, ya empezaron con las versiones anteriores del software. Y bueno, estudiamos el spread of excitation y veíamos las diferencias entre los pacientes, que algunos pacientes no tenían, digamos, casi ninguna selectividad de recepción de frecuencia a lo largo de la cadena de electrodos, y también las medidas refractarias del nervio auditivo. Con el lanzamiento del Custom Sound EP, pudimos encontrar medidas objetivas en milímetros, por ejemplo, del spread of excitation en 1 minuto y 21 segundos o 28 segundos. Se puede tener para cada electrodo la medida de la dispersión de la excitabilidad, el ancho de esa medida de la dispersión en cualquiera, digamos, punto de corte, digamos, nosotros, el software nos da en un 50%, pero nosotros podemos medir en 75, 80, se puede elegir el punto de corte de esa medida en milímetros y de una forma rápida entender cómo esa corriente, acá el ejemplo del electrodo 11, se dispersa ahí adentro de la cóclea en diferentes electrodos. De la misma forma, el Custom Sound Software EP nos permite la medida del Recovery Function, que nos da la medida del periodo refractario relativo en 1 minuto y 38 segundos, la medida del periodo refractario absoluto y la amplitud al nivel de la saturación de esa respuesta. ¿Qué es que podemos leer de ese test? En realidad acá vimos una respuesta cuando el nervio ni siquiera había entrado en periodo refractario, mientras está en periodo refractario con diferentes tiempos de Masker Probe Interval, el nervio no responde. Cuando empieza a salir del periodo refractario, la respuesta, las primeras fibras responden, y cuando va saliendo casi todas las fibras del nervio excitadas con esta corriente, salen de periodo refractario, se encuentra entonces la saturación, y aunque se cambie el periodo, el Masker Probe Interval, la respuesta tiene la misma amplitud, y esa será la amplitud final al nivel de saturación. Es más rápido decirlo, pero ven que faltan 10 segundos. Quiero mostrarles cómo el software muy rápidamente nos da el tiempo, el periodo refractario absoluto, el periodo refractario relativo y la amplitud de saturación. De toda la literatura sacamos que, por ejemplo, Botros y Psarros nos muestran que cócleas con diferentes sobrevivencias neurales pueden tener diferentes tiempos de recuperación, porque un diferente tamaño o muchas fibras entrando en periodo y saliendo del periodo refractario responden de una forma diferente. De la misma forma que tipos de cadenas de electrodos rectas o perimodiolares, también por tener diferentes distancias al modiolo, también pueden tener diferentes recovery functions o periodos refractarios, porque tienen diferentes dispersiones de excitabilidad. Inspirados por esa, digamos, asumiendo esa hipótesis, hicimos un trabajo recientemente publicado tratando de ver si había alguna relación del spread of excitation con el recovery function, y vimos que no hay, ni en individuos adultos con sordera postlocutiva o postlingual o prelingual, o niños o adultos o implantados con electrodos rectos o perimodiolares. Aunque no encontramos esa correlación, no es el hecho de que no estén correlacionadas, simplemente nos muestran que ambas pueden ser muy importantes, pero ellas son reflejos de resultados de aspectos fisiológicos o físicos adentro de la cóclea diferentes. Entonces, con otras hipótesis, dibujamos otro diseño de estudio con la hipótesis de aquí. realmente el aporte neural, la densidad neural, ya manifestada por la misma etiología de la sordera o el recovery function, el periodo refractario, tal cual la dispersión de la corriente física dentro de la cóclea, que depende del tamaño de la cóclea, si hay agujeros en la cóclea como en la otosclerosis, que si escapa la corriente adentro de la cóclea, si el electrodo está lejano al modiolo, en fin, si el electrodo es de banda completa o de media banda, o si el electrodo es distante a su vecino, todas esas informaciones deben, a nuestra hipótesis, deben interferir en el mismo umbral y en el crecimiento del loudness del paciente. Entonces, ese diseño de nuestro estudio nos llevó a identificar si habían diferencias en el spread of excitation en diferentes etiologías, en niños, en adultos, implantados con electrodos rectos o perimodiolares, también diferencias en el periodo refractario, y si habían, digamos, asociaciones de esas medidas avanzadas con el mismo umbral de la respuesta neural. Hicimos una clasificación de etiologías para poder englobarlas todas a las etiologías de nuestros pacientes, y tomamos cuidado con la estimulación, usamos intensidades fijas por encima del umbral de la telemetría de respuesta neural, porque sabemos que esas medidas avanzadas sufren influencia de esas medidas de la intensidad de la corriente, son diferentes en adultos y niños, y el tipo de electrodo. Entonces, separamos, ¿no?, adultos y niños, y de nuestro pool de 1.256 registros a lo largo de los últimos 10 a 11 años, sacamos los que llenaron los, digamos, criterios de selección, 400 registros de niños y 258 de adultos. Unas cosas que nos llaman la atención, por ejemplo, la literatura dice, como les mostré, que el spread of excitation o la dispersión de la corriente, tanto más fuerte el estímulo, más va a dispersar y más amplitud va a tener, porque más fibras del nervio van a responder. Pero llama la atención que hay pacientes con muy amplia, digamos, dispersión, alta ancho de spread of excitation y muy baja amplitud. Y al revés, hay personas con mucha amplitud, o sea, muchas fibras respondiendo, angosta dispersión de excitabilidad. ¿Quiénes?
Creo que Vale se fue. Valeria, no escuchamos tu audio. No sé si me
Claro,
escuchas.
absoluto.
Ahora
¿Sí?
Sí, ahora sí, su audio se fue. Si quieres cerrar tu cámara, ciérrala y creo que...
Mejora el audio. ¿Así? Mejor.
Así,
Okay.
perfecto.
Perfecto, gracias.
De nada.
Bueno, perdón, ¿vuelvo? No hace falta.
Vuelve a la última diapositiva, por favor.
Ok,
Eso,
acá. Entonces, en la comparación de adultos y niños, vimos que sí son diferentes en varios parámetros avanzados, en el periodo refractario absoluto, en la dispersión de la corriente, en el electrodo 11, sobre todo en los electrodos perimodiolares. Entonces, por esa razón, estudiamos siempre separados, adultos separados de niños, electrodos rectos de perimodiolares, y vimos que los niños en electrodos perimodiolares, comparándolos con los rectos, son diferentes en amplitud, en la cantidad de fibras que son reclutadas. En cambio, en electrodo 6, perdón, en el electrodo 11 vimos que todos los parámetros del spread of excitation son diferentes de rectos y perimodiolares en niños. En el electrodo 16 vimos que nada más que el spread of excitation es diferente. En adultos vimos que la amplitud, tal cual los niños en el electrodo 6, son diferentes en la base de la cóclea entre los electrodos perimodulares y rectos. En el electrodo 11, en la mitad de la cadena o de la cóclea, todos los parámetros del spread of excitation son diferentes y aún el umbral, eso impacta también un poco y el corriente, y por eso también más
de nuevo, hagamos en el más. Valeria.
Y después fuimos
Vale.
a estudiar, sí.
Perdón, se fue de nuevo. Si puedes voltar, paramos en el más, estaba en la última parte de la explicación de esta diapositiva. Perfecto.
Mil
Gracias.
perdones, gracias. Bueno, en el electrodo 16 vimos para los adultos, tal cual los niños, que los electrodos rectos tienen una dispersión más ancha, más amplia, por estar precisamente más lejano al modiolo. Fuimos también a buscar las etiologías, qué diferencias habría en los parámetros avanzados de la telemetría de acuerdo a la etiología de la sordera. Y sí vimos que en adultos y niños hay diferencias. En adultos, en los electrodos rectos, nada más que vimos una diferencia en el periodo refractario absoluto, pero en los niños, vimos que también hay diferencias en la dispersión y en el periodo refractario absoluto y relativo en ambos electrodos, según la etiología. La comparación de Dunn, ¿no?, que es después de par a par, para los adultos nos mostró, por ejemplo, que los pacientes con etiología progresiva idiopática tienen mucho menor tiempo de periodo refractario absoluto que, por ejemplo, las infecciosas tipo meningitis y otitis media que llevó a la sordera. Haciendo la asociación y haciendo corto acá para terminar, hay asociación directa del spread of excitation y el tipo de electrodo, o sea, digamos, el electrodo, no el tipo de electrodo, sino que el electrodo testado, si es base, ápice o medio de la cóclea, eso impacta el umbral de la telemetría de respuesta neural. En niños y en adultos vimos que hay una asociación directa de tanto el periodo refractario absoluto, relativo, spread of excitation y amplitud de saturación, y el electrodo testado en adultos tiene impacto directo, o sea, influencia estadísticamente significante con el umbral de la telemetría de respuesta neural. Entonces, como para resumir y concluir, este estudio nos mostró que las diferencias en los parámetros avanzados de la telemetría de respuesta neural entre las etiologías sugieren que hay un impacto de la densidad neural y la impedancia del hueso en el entorno del electrodo que influencian esas medidas. También el local de la cóclea demostrado por donde está el electrodo testado y la dispersión de la excitabilidad neural, el periodo refractario absoluto y relativo están asociados con el umbral de la respuesta y en adultos y en niños nada.
Y de nuevo. Valeria.
El umbral de la respuesta neural y los niveles psicofísicos, a nuestro ver, deben ser resultado entonces de una ecuación que contempla todas esas medidas avanzadas. Nosotros también pensamos que el slope de ese umbral debe ser incluido en el futuro, en las digamos, procedimientos de la inteligencia artificial, porque también en un estudio muy reciente que está sometido para publicación vimos que hay una correlación directa del slope del electrodo 11 con el rango dinámico, o sea, es un súper buen mostrador para nosotros de qué tan grande tiene que ser el, digamos, tanto más grande ese es el slope, menor será el, digamos, el rango dinámico. Entonces tenemos que tomar ventaja o aprovechar que la telemetría de respuesta neural, el umbral puede ser medido en niños que están caminando, durmiendo, riéndose, viendo tele o llorando, ¿no? Que la mamá lo sostenga. En 1 minuto y 38 segundos podemos tener mucha información. También se probó que se puede hacer la telemetría remota, entonces eso es una gran ventaja para el futuro, que no hace falta que el paciente esté con nosotros presencialmente. El spread of excitation y las funciones de recovery function pueden las dos juntas en medio de menos de 2 minutos y medio en cada electrodo, podemos tener mucha información. Y entonces juntas esas medidas avanzadas de la telemetría neural pueden ayudarnos a disminuir esa variabilidad, no solo de resultados, sino que de programación entre los centros. Entonces, respondiendo a nuestra primera pregunta, ¿serán las medidas avanzadas, ¿no?, incluidas en la inteligencia artificial, en la programación basada en la inteligencia artificial? I really hope so. Espero sinceramente que morir en mi tumba me van a ver sonriendo feliz si eso se hace realidad. Le agradezco siempre a mí en el Hospital de Clínicas, porque sin sus
Yo creo que voy a hablar por Valeria porque siempre se pone a agradecer el equipo que trabaja con ella en el Hospital de Clínicas.
asistencia y por estar acá con nosotros. Y acá un poco de nuestras referencias. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ti, Vale, y se cortó justo cuando estaba agradeciendo a su equipo y yo tomé la palabra, iba a agradecer por ti, porque sé que siempre agradece a las chicas, entonces que son parte casi de todo este trabajo que haces lindo. Bueno, yo te tomo la pantalla porque voy a hacer, como estamos un poquito arriba del tiempo, espere que pongo mi presentación. Entonces acá están los materiales que tenemos y las preguntas si tienen, pero voy a hacer solamente una porque tenemos un montón de preguntas. So first yo voy a hablar en inglés solo para invitar a todos los ponentes que abran sus cámaras ahora. And I would like to thank you, our speakers, for the excellent presentations. And secondly, I would like to thank you for everybody that is hearing us. It was a great audience. And now I will invite all speakers to turn on your cameras for the last part, is the question and answer session. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Valeria. I will do just questions that is all for you. And Valeria, can you hear me? It doesn't need to turn on your camera, but to sure that you...
I'm just trying to open my camera. I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Okay, the question is, how do you see the future of the audiology with the AI innovations? So I think that we can start with Felipe because he is an engineer, but maybe you can suggest or you can share your point of view about the audiology practice in our area. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, look, The vision, well, I try to express the vision. So it's a vision where actually the role of the audiologist is very central. But the centerpiece of it is really the coaching relation and almost helping the patient throughout the hearing journey with less focus on the technical acts. Fitting is a technical act. Taking a test is a technical act. That role will be moving more, I think, to self mode, to patient mode, through all the tools that we press. So we're really working hard that the self-test of patients are useful for clinical decision making. But then the information is there, and there's still the decision making as such, and so for that we will try to do our best to go to a self-serving model for the patients where it's appropriate. But it's much more likely that for many years to come, that there will still be absolutely a big role to play by the clinician, and that we support the decision making by the clinician, that augmented intelligence scenario. So it's a vision where we can, with the professionals, serve more patients. Well, we're providing the technologies, but we're not as a company, we are not determining how a medical community is organizing the care. And so we try to create options in countries where there is a shortage of audiologists. There will be a self-service model hopefully available through all of the work, but it's not the only one that we want to support. And in other countries, the medical community may decide that to use the tools in a completely different way. So coming back to Jan's initial statement, actually, of course, we are interested in making hearing implants more accessible to that is under treatment, and to the extent that it can generate growth. There is plenty of work to do for all of us, be in the medical community, but also in the manufacturers, to work there. So the more patients we can serve, the better.
Okay, thank you so much. So I pass the for Regina and Valeria. How can you see our future?
I see us being able to use AI to enhance our clinical skills while reaching more individuals, which is going to be one of the biggest challenges as we work on our outreach and our awareness, and that's occurring globally, so we need to be prepared. And I think that with this assistance, that will help us not only to allow patients to be proactive, for us to be able to allow them to have a more active role in their own hearing health and their assessment, but utilizing their professionals to be able to manage their performance and outcomes in a very effective way.
Okay, thank you. Valeria?
Yo pienso que la inteligencia artificial será nuestra mejor amiga, ¿no? Queremos a mucha gente implantada, queremos tener tiempo para nuestros pacientes que realmente necesiten cuidados específicos, y saber que la inteligencia artificial puede ser nuestra Alexia, digamos, y hacer lo fácil, ¿no? Y tener la seguridad que los pacientes van a estar bien atendidos y bien programados, aunque con una inteligencia artificial, es todo lo que queremos. Y tener tiempo para todo lo demás, que seguirá siendo súper importante, porque seguiremos teniendo pacientes que por ahí no tienen, digamos, la posibilidad de hacer test psicoacústicos o no tengan respuestas neurales presentes. O sea, nuestra sabiduría y nuestra experiencia siempre será importante, pero de esta forma podremos, digamos, atender y asistir a más pacientes con la seguridad de que estén bien programados, digamos.
Gracias, Vale, por su comentario. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Felipe, for your time. You all gave a great presentations, and I've learned so much from listening to you, and I'm sure that the audience learning too. So just to finish our our seminar. Just to remind you that you receive a short questionnaire about your opinion and the next topics for upcoming seminars. So thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you in 3 months in our next seminar. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Valeria, again.
Thank you
for all. No, thank you. And thank you for all Cochlear's team behind the seminar. I will finish now. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye. Thank you.